we're kind of talking about how to replace Flipgrid, let me know. But it's 12:02. I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and you have found our way to our professional development series, our first event, at least the first event part of the series for this academic year. We're so excited that you're here. As always, we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement.
All right, let me share my screen and sound. Okay, and Don, will you give me a thumbs up whenever you see what I want you to see? Okay, great. Here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilized the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
these truths
because we still remember.
Thank you. I want to let you all know the TLC Professional Development Series meets every Wednesday, 12 noon over Zoom at this Zoom link that you all have successfully found. We also record all of our events for asynchronous viewing. So if you have a class or meeting or something, or just don't want to come at this time, but want to watch it later, we have that opportunity available for you as well. So if you see something in any of our events, you say, oh my goodness, my colleagues would benefit so much from this. We post these on our website, our TLC website, and you can share the links with your colleagues and they can learn the same stuff that you're learning today. We also have the opportunity to earn a TLC Professional Development Certificate, either as a graduate teaching assistant or as a faculty or staff member. And my colleague Ashley is going to drop that information into the chat for you. If you're a faculty member and want to become a TLC fellow, we also have potential opportunities for that. You can check that out at that same link. Next week, we have an amazing event on AI pedagogy and curriculum 1, because we're going to have a follow-up, a 2 event a little bit later this semester. And I don't know about you, but AI has been on my mind. It's been on a lot of people's mind. So we're going to have a couple of events that are related to that. And our first one is next week. That event is going to be led by Sydney Alexis and Teresa Merrick Cassidy. Today's presenter is me. So I'm going to be talking to you and I'm going to share my screen. It's always the hardest part of a Zoom presentation. And I'm so excited that you're here. All right, Ashley, is this doing what I wanted to do? Ashley says yes. So for those of you who are more visual than auditory, this is a little slide giving you that TLC professional development information. So again, Wednesday from noon to 1, you see that Zoom link. Our events are archived, and you can also earn a professional development certificate and or become a TLC fellow. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about sustainable excellence in teaching, because I think it's important that we're excellent. But I think we shouldn't be excellent only once. I think we should be excellent forever. So I'm going to kind of talk about some tips that I have for sustaining your teaching excellence. So my objectives today, I'm going to talk about obstacles. We're going to do this briefly. Obstacles to sustaining excellence in teaching. Then we're going to talk about how to achieve excellence in teaching, because you can't sustain it until you've achieved it. And then once you've achieved it, we're going to talk about how to sustain it. As we go through this conversation, though, I think it's important you kind of keep a couple of disclaimers in mind. First of all, I'm going to share my perspectives and experiences. I am N of 1. I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of teaching. I talk to a lot of colleagues. I go to a lot of workshops, and I'm sharing, things that I've experienced through that. But do be aware that I am me. I'm Don, and I may not be like you. For instance, I have lots of privileges. For instance, just a couple of them. I'm straight, I'm white, I'm cisgender, I'm a middle-aged man. I have normal abilities. My family in this country, we worship holidays like Christmas and Easter, and that might give us some demographic privileges in some ways. So it's important to kind of understand that my perspective is my perspective, and it comes from all the privileges and challenges that I've experienced as an individual. And I may have succeeded despite rather than because of what I did. So as you're going through and you're hearing my recommendations, if you're saying, you know what, I don't think that will work for me, then disregard that one. You don't need my permission for this, but I'm going to give it anyway. I'm going to give you permission to disregard any advice that I give you if it doesn't work for you. Because what I want to do is give you information for you to make the best decisions that you can make to be the best excellent teacher as you, not as somebody else. And I'm also going to recommend you see other perspectives to complement my talk because I feel good about the advice that I'm going to give you. I feel good about the recommendations, but I have lots of wonderful teaching colleagues here at K-State. It's one of my favorite things about K-State is we have a vibrant teaching community. Talk to other teachers, and they might be on this call with us right now to kind of share your ideas as well. So I'm going to begin with that first objective we had about what are some obstacles. And I'm looking at obstacles to achieve excellence in teaching and obstacles to sustain. We're going to start with the first one, and we're going to go briefly. And I'm going to try to find out where I can see my chat, maybe. All right. So if, and Ashley, I might ask you to help manage the chat as I'm trying to find it on my 3 screens. I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat or to even say out loud, what are some obstacles to us becoming excellent in teaching? And I have found the chat. Excellent. So now I'm starting to see some of the answers that people are giving. And the first thing that I'm seeing is not something that I'm surprised by. And that is time, right? So you get time, not enough time, time, overloaded schedules, time, so many responsibilities, burnout, money, work-life balance, confidence, and time. So the biggest one that we're seeing is that it takes time to become an excellent teacher. Now, I think that sometimes it takes more time than it needs. Now, I am not telling you that teaching is not important. I think it's the most important thing that we do at Kansas State University is teaching at the graduate and the undergraduate level. So I love teaching. It's very, very important. But I do think sometimes we put more time than it needs. There's something in psychology called Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law basically says the task takes the time you give it. So if you give yourself 2 hours to do something, it'll take 2 hours. But if you give that same task 8 hours, it will take 8 hours. So I think sometimes what we do is we kind of overestimate the amount of time that something takes, and then we maybe spin our wheels a little bit less efficiently. So I'm imagining that the same obstacles we had for achieving are going to be for sustaining, and even more so. That now that we've got it where we want it to, the continual revision, the continual tweaking, the continual updating, that becomes a little bit of a burden. So understanding that I can't make these obstacles go away, I'm going to try to give you some recommendations to your approach to creating teaching excellence that will mitigate maybe the influence of some of these obstacles. And I love lists. If you've ever learned with me before, if you've ever seen me present, I love lists. And I have 10 ways that I think we can use to promote sustainable excellence in all of our teaching. Now, this isn't necessarily a rank ordered list. The first one's not necessarily the most important one, and the 10's not the least important. This was an order that kind of made sense for me to outline them and giving this conversation and this narrative. So don't take too much into account into what number precedes each recommendation. The first recommendation I'm going to share with you is that you got to develop and refine an excellent teaching philosophy. Without an excellent teaching philosophy, you don't really have a foundation from which to build excellent teaching, because teaching starts with teachers. And for those of you who have never seen me present before, I use the word teacher to refer to all of us who are teaching college level classes. Some people prefer the term professor. Some people prefer the term instructor. That's fine. I think teacher works best for me because it puts the emphasis on the behavior, which I think is teaching. So that's why I use that term. I'm not trying to offend someone. I once had a professor say that I don't teach K-12. I'm not a teacher. If that's your response to this, I apologize for that, but I'm explaining my choice of language. I think that teaching begins with teachers, and our teaching personas and our philosophies are going to provide the foundation for teaching and learning. The way that we think about teaching, the way that we embody teaching, are going to provide the foundations for teaching and learning. And they're going to dictate our teaching practices. If your teaching philosophy doesn't emerge in your teaching practices, then it's really not your teaching philosophy. And this is actually kind of one of my pet peeves sometimes when I do teaching observations, is someone will tell me they're teaching philosophy and maybe it's interactive learning or something like that. Then I go watch them and there's none of that in the class that I see. I want to see your teaching philosophy come alive in your practices. And I want this to be intentional, purposeful, and dynamic. I want these to be things that aren't just something you happened into randomly. I want it to be something that you've committed some thought to and decided who it is that you want to be as a teacher. Our teaching persona, this is a language that I used on the previous slide and hadn't yet defined it. Our teaching persona is how we decide to present ourselves to our students. So what am I going to show the students? How am I going to interact with the students? How am I going to describe myself to my students? Our teaching philosophy is how we personally conceptualize the process of teaching and learning. It's how we think that happens. It's how we think, what we think the core is to excellent teaching and learning. Now, what I want us to do now, in kind of wondering, you might be thinking, well, what is my teaching persona? What is my teaching philosophy? I have a little activity, brief activity that'll help you kind of get started in thinking what your teaching philosophy and your teaching persona might be related to. So I want you to think about what single word, you only get one. You want to hyphenate, that's fine, but you only get one word that you want your students to use to describe you as a teacher. Now, I put teacher in quotes here because when I'm talking about teaching at a university setting, I might be talking about actual teaching in a classroom or online. I might be talking about mentoring. I might be talking about supervision. I might be talking about advising. I think teaching takes a lot of different forms. And I'm going to ask that you put it in the chat, but wait for the waterfall, meaning when I say go, everybody's entering and it all comes in. A couple of you already put your word in. That's great. I didn't give that instruction yet. Completely, totally fine. And I love you taking the initiative there. But for those of you who haven't, I want you to wait just a second, write that word in, and then we're all going to enter at once. And then this waterfalls into the chat. This is a teaching technique that I learned from Tracy Brimhall a few years ago when we first went to remote teaching from COVID. I think it's really cool, so I'm sharing that with you now. It's called a waterfall chat for when we're teaching in Zoom and online kinds of environments. All right, so let's hit enter now, and let's see all those words come in about the words you want your students to use to describe you as a teacher. All right, we've got some great words here. We've got engaging, we've got approachable, we've got curious, we've got inspiring, we've got facilitator, we've got guide. We've got understanding, enthusiastic, creative, autonomy supportive, knowledgeable, passionate, engaging, joyful, approachable. These are excellent starts. These are excellent foundations for excellent teaching. So now what we're going to do is we're going to figure out, well, how are we going to get there? So if we want to be seen as supportive, then we have to do supportive things. If we want to be seen as approachable, then we have to behave in a way that makes us approachable. So that one word becomes inspirational to how we present ourselves to our class and how it is that we set up our class, our structures, our policies, and all of those kinds of things. So for those of you who might not even have known, what my word could be, maybe you don't have a lot of teaching experience yet, maybe you haven't had that be part of your professional responsibilities yet, and you're saying, I don't know. The starting point that I would kind of invite is think about who you want to learn with. So kind of being empathetic to that approach and saying, if I were my student, how would I learn best? And then be that teacher. That may not work for every single student, but I think it's a good place to start. I'm also going to say that your teaching philosophy must, I don't always say must, but I'm saying must now. Your teaching philosophy must be founded in supporting your students' learning and supporting your students' success. If your teaching philosophy is really not grounded in supporting your students' learning and success, maybe teaching's not your thing, because that really is the job the way that we're doing it now. 50 years ago, maybe it was standing at a podium and reading text to students. It's not what the practice is in higher education right now. So we want to be promoting student learning and success. It also means we're going to teach people, not just content. I, in my teaching world, in my teaching life, quote a lot of my heroes. One of my heroes is Greg Eislein. He's a professor of English. He's a University Distinguished Teaching Scholar, and he led our K-State FIRST program for many, many years. One of the things that he said that has always stuck with me, he said, good teachers teach content, great teachers teach people. And I think that is really kind of an important thing to understand, that the people in our classes, our audience, the people that we're learning with, they're actual human people. They're not just points in a spreadsheet. They're not just, data points in a Canvas gradebook. These are actual people with lives, responsibilities, and all of that. And we want to teach them. We don't just want to teach that PowerPoint slide. We want to teach the people in our audience. And they are whole people. They are not just the students. They are family members. They are friends and relatives. They are occupations. They are all of these other kinds of things that go beyond who they are in the four walls of our class. So being understanding of that is going to be important, I think, in us being good teachers. We're also going to teach inclusively. It kind of blows my mind that this has become kind of a politicized statement for us to teach inclusively and recognize diversity and all of that kind of thing. When I say teaching inclusively, I think this is a moral issue that basically every student deserves to be welcomed, valued, and supported in your class. I'm going to say that again. Every student deserves to be welcomed, valued, and supported in your class. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter what their background is, doesn't matter what their identity is. Now, those things are important and we should acknowledge and recognize them, but every single student, regardless of who they are, deserves to be supported in our classes. And that's what I mean to teach inclusively. This is something we should do. It's the right thing to do. And our practices should be inspired by all of these goals. So I have a lot of people who say things like, I teach inclusively, but then they don't do anything in their practices to show that they teach inclusively. There's no persona that they demonstrate to their students that shows that they teach inclusively. So I want us to be motivated by these various goals. Now, when I had to come up with my teaching persona, my teaching philosophy a long, long time ago, I didn't have the opportunity to take a principal's college teaching class like we offer here. I didn't have workshops or those kind of things. I was just kind of thrown in front of a class and I had to figure it out. So what I did is I thought back to my best teachers. I thought then the people that you see on this list always it makes me sadder and sadder every year because not all of them are with us anymore. But these are some of the best teachers from my educational past. And what happened is I found out that there were two things that got them onto this list of my favorite teachers. The first was they told me they believed in me. And I think that's an important message to give to our students to let them know that you belong in my class, you're gonna do great, I believe in you, you're awesome. These are things that they told me, I believed them, and I came to class and I tried to learn as much as I could because they believed in me. That was inspirational for me. The second thing that they all had in common is that they were all thoroughly engaged in their teaching. They all loved to teach, and that was palpable to me as a student. And sometimes they even taught classes that I didn't really like the content, but I came because they liked the content. And this was really important for me to motivate me as a teacher. So in me deciding who I wanted to be as a teacher, I tried to model a couple of those characteristics, tried to believe in my students, and tried to love the activity of teaching. So when we ask students what they want in their teachers, this is a word cloud that we did in a study a long time ago. We asked, what do students want in their teachers? We see some words pop out here. What are some of the biggest words on this word cloud? Bigger words are given more frequently. That's how word clouds work. What are some of the most frequent responses our student gave us and what they want in their teachers? And you can say it out loud or you can drop it in the chat, whatever works. Right, we're seeing understanding, right? We're seeing understanding. We're also seeing caring and helpful and patient and all of those kind of things that go beyond just the brilliance. Yeah, friend and passion are other ones that show up here too. They go just beyond the brilliance, right? It's something that actually is a human aspect to us as teachers. Then we ask them, how do you describe your favorite and your least favorite college teacher? The one on your left is their favorite. The one on the right is their least favorite. And for their most favorite, and a couple of you already given the answer right ahead, we see fun and funny. Um, on the right, their least favorite, we see things like boring, right? So it's not just the content that we share in class that's going to help our students learn. It's going to be how we do it. So there's going to be a practice that accompanies that content knowledge, which is necessary, but not sufficient for excellent teaching. Now, my teaching philosophy, a number of aspects of my teaching philosophy, but guided by a lot of this data, guided by a lot of my own experiences, and guided by the experience that I've had in conducting research with students, I developed a teaching philosophy that I call trickle-down engagement. We also colloquially call this the engage the sage teaching philosophy, which is wordplay on sage on the stage, which is kind of a teaching philosophy. We put a very brilliant person in front of a room and then they spew information out into their audience. I said, well, if we're going to have a sage up there doing it, let's engage them and make them really love the process. And what I think is going to happen when we engage the sage is we're going to focus on our own experience first. A lot of the reason that I think it's hard for us to achieve and sustain teaching excellence is, people said the motivation, right? They said the time, they said the responsibilities that we have. It's hard to devote time to that because it's not necessarily inherently fulfilling. Well, I think it can be. And I think when we make teaching about us and about optimizing our experience, about making it a wonderful experience that we want to go to class and we want to have these experiences, we want to share the content with students, it's going to be better for the students too. So I do think Engage the Sage is indirectly a student-focused activity, but it's kind of an instructor-focused perspective. I want to focus on your experience as the teacher first. So when you are thoroughly engaged, when you are only teaching when you're teaching, when you're not distracted by all the other things out there, when you're treating your classroom as an oasis, when you're going and doing only that, you are going to be loving that experience more. And I think that's going to be palpable for your students. And then what happens is they're going to be more engaged. And when they're more engaged and they're paying more attention, they're more invested in the content, they're going to learn better. And we have data on this that shows that this process works. When our students pick up on our engagement, they learn better because they are engaged more themselves. So I think this is something we need to be thinking about when we're deciding who we want to be in our classes. Now, I think there's a broader foundation for excellence in teaching that I'm going to share with you now here too. And I call this bringing peace to the classroom. And I love the idea of bringing safety and security, inclusivity, belonging, welcomeness to all of classes. I love that aspect, that community aspect. But peace is also an acronym. And these, I think, are the 5 essentials for excellent teaching. First is preparation. We need a plan. We need to know what we're doing that day. Second is expertise. We got to know our stuff. And when I say expertise, it doesn't mean you have to be like a world-renowned expert. It means you have to know enough to teach it. And that might be something a little bit different than being a world-renowned expert. Third, we want to be authentic. We want to be someone that students see as an actual human person, not a brilliant robot, and someone who they can trust and confide in. 4, we're going to be caring. And there's 3 things I think we should care about. We should care about our content, because if we don't care about our content, we're probably not going to teach it well. Second, we're going to care about our students as people. Third, we're going to care about the process of teaching that content to our students. And then the final is engagement, which we already talked about, which means you're going to be fully invested in that experience of teaching that content to your students. So when you have created your teaching philosophy, and I've given you some ideas to get started, you're going to use that philosophy to dictate your practices. So I said this a couple of times, your philosophy, your persona have to dictate your practices. But now what we're going to do is we're going to use that philosophy to inspire our classes so that they have similarities in them. One of the biggest kind of obstacles that I see to sustaining excellence in teaching is when people teach a different class, they start from scratch. They start with a whole new structure, a whole new kind of approach to the class, whole new set of assignments. I'm saying maybe don't do that. I'm saying maybe what you do is you have similar structures, similar policies, and similar assessments that you've built and you've kind of perfected over your experience in teaching. So keep what works, just adapt it to the level of the class. So it might be it has to adapt differently for a graduate course than a first-year experience course, for instance. That's fine. But maybe start with a similar structure and make adjustments as needed rather than reinventing the wheel every time. So all of that is my first recommendation, which is having an excellent teaching philosophy. My second recommendation, and for those of you looking at the clock, not all the recommendations take as long as that first one did. Our second recommendation is to use your resources. You do not have to start from scratch in this experience at all. There have been people who have done this before us. There are people who have done this incredibly well. You're going to have a lot of them present in our TLC Professional Development Series. We have a lot of resources to help you out in both achieving and sustaining excellence in teaching. So use those resources. You know, you can start with your mentors and colleagues, the people that you learn from. If you're a PhD student or a master's student, you know, maybe your major professor is a good one to start with. Maybe a teacher that you respect in your program might be someone to talk to. Maybe a colleague down the hall might be someone to talk to. And if you say, well, that doesn't work for me, well, then reach out to us. TLC, we have wonderful staff members. We're awesome. We really like talking about teaching. Reach out to us with questions. I love to visit. I love to kind of share ideas and listen to what you're doing and find new innovative things. It's how I make a lot of my connections. So if you just want to chat about teaching, reach out to us. And then, as I've mentioned, we have our workshops, our professional development events, and we have lots of video resources, including having all of those events archived. Now, if you're saying this professional development series that I'm coming to now, what's that going to look like in the fall semester? Well, I'm glad you asked. So about the first half of that fall semester is going to look like this. And you can see we have wonderful events related to excellence in teaching today, pedagogy and curriculum later related to AI. We'll have teaching chats, which means that I'll kind of facilitate a conversation around the overall topic, but I want to hear your questions. I want to hear the concerns and issues that you're having so we can crowdsource some of those answers. We're going to have people like Andy Thompson and Camilla Roberts, who represent various offices on our campus, come and share information. Tarek is going to come in and talk about excellent teaching practices, although that's not the title he gave me. I'm just inferring that. We haven't gotten a title just yet from that. We're going to talk about mid-semester evaluations. And in the second half of the semester, we're going to talk about AI again. We're going to talk about large classes, because sometimes we teach large classes and students have to take them, maybe not necessarily always joyfully taking them. So we'll talk about kind of approaches to doing that. We'll talk about T-vals. We'll talk about work-life balance. We'll talk about revising your curriculum. We'll talk about mental health and well-being, both for students and faculty. So we have a wonderful slate of events for this fall semester, and we hope that you're able to attend or to watch asynchronously. We also have a YouTube channel with lots of videos on teaching philosophy and practices. We call this Engage the Sage. There's lots of hyperlinks throughout this presentation. So if you want this presentation, reach out to me. You can click the links. You can see all the stuff. We have lots of videos on lots of things. We get over 100 videos right now. They're relatively short. So most of them are under 10 minutes. We have just-in-time videos for the first part of the semester, middle part of the semester, later part of the semester. We have lots of videos about active learning and ways to do that. We have videos about doing presentations, both teaching presentations as well as research presentations. We have videos about assignments you might want to consider using in your class. We have videos about how to demonstrate your teaching excellence. Maybe you're going up for an award, maybe you're applying for a teaching job. We have videos to kind of help you make sure that those materials are as good as they can be. We have professional development videos related to other parts of your career, maybe those research parts or those service parts. We have time saver videos that we think are kind of hacks to kind of help you kind of streamline some of those responsibilities. We also have some feel-good videos that just maybe you just need to pick me up and you can say, let me hear that funny story, or let me think about this way that I can get myself feeling better. We also have videos you can potentially share with your students. Maybe help them write emails to you that aren't maybe as uninformative as the emails you're currently getting. Maybe they have to create a personal statement or request a letter of rec. We have videos to help them do that. And we also have some other fun videos, like all the times that I screwed up in making the videos. So we have all of those kind of things. I don't expect that you read them all through. I'm just letting you know that that exists. And if you want this PowerPoint later, you can click those links and enjoy the stuff that we have. My third recommendation is you're going to streamline your content. I absolutely recommend you streamline your content. Put recurring assignments on a regular schedule. So making your structure simple, letting your students know this is always due on Thursday afternoon is going to make it really, really easy. We're going to be predictable. One of the best ways to reduce stress and anxiety is to increase prediction. So sometimes people say, well, if it's always the same assignment, it's always that same reflection, always due on Thursday afternoon, that's going to get boring. Not if they're reflecting on different things. And you'll actually teach them that this is how you're going to interact and engage with the material of my class. So being predictable is not the same as being boring. What this will do is it'll create a rhythm for your class. It's a rhythm that's going to make it easier for you to navigate, which is always a good idea. It's also going to make it easy for your students to navigate. And one of the things that I recommend for simplifying structure, this works for me, I know for a lot of you it doesn't. I love having my classes be worth 1,000 points. It's really easy then to figure out how much stuff is worth. If I have a 1,000-point class and I have a 200-point exam, that's worth 20%. If I have a 1,000-point class, you need 900 of those points to get an A. So it's a very psychologically satisfying number, rather than saying my class is out of 623 points, and I have to then figure out a lot of math that I can't do right now in front of you without a calculator to find out how many points I need for an A. So this is something that I found has streamlined the structure for me. It's also a sufficient point total that my students tell me it's worth working for. I used to do it out of 100 points, and I had my students tell me they could not motivate themselves to study for a 20-point exam. So I added zeros to everything, and now those 20-point exams are 200-point exams, and now my students are happy. So this is simple, it's streamlined, and it's helpful for me. Then streamline your content. Only two kinds of things we should be teaching. That which is important, that which is necessary. That's it. If it's not important, interesting, don't teach it. If it's not necessary, don't teach it. Then think about what is personally relevant and interesting, because our classes get to be fun and cool. I realize there's a curriculum. I realize it might be a prerequisite, but find a way to make that class awesome. Because when the content is awesome, I want to teach it. And when the content is awesome and I want to teach it, then my students want to learn it and they learn it better. And let your course breathe. So unlike this conversation so far, let your content breathe so that you're providing space for your students to consider that information and interact with it. Then focus and spread out your assessments. I think our assessment plans are often needlessly complicated and too work intensive, both for our students and for us. So focus your assessments. Assess what you need to, but do that directly, fairly, and succinctly. I'm going to say that again, succinctly. Do it in an economy of effort. Make these assignments valuable. Make these exciting for you. I know that I've done this well when I'm looking forward to the deadline of my assignments. When I'm going in and saying, has anyone submitted yet? Because I can't wait to read these. That lets me know that my assessments are doing what they're supposed to do in terms of inviting my engagement for the class. Then spread them out. I'm a huge fan of having more assessments, but making them lower stakes. So having 10-point assignments here, there, rather than only a couple that are worth a great deal. That creates a lot more intensity, that creates a lot more stress and anxiety, both for us and for our students. Use those lower stakes assignments to scaffold, to build to the higher stakes assignments. And to the extent that you can, allow student choice or even assign to batches. It's not always necessary that all of your students do the same assignments on the same schedule. Sometimes what I'll do in my class, I have a general psychology class of about 207 students right now. I might have half of them do the assignment for this date and the other half do a similar assignment for a later date. And what that does is it spaces out work for me as a grader. When you're setting up your assignments, you got to understand everything you assign will come back. So if you're not looking forward to it, that's going to be miserable when that deadline comes. So make sure that everything you assign, you look forward to it coming back, and definitely do not overwhelm the end of the semester. A lot of us, and I used to do this too earlier in my career, have even half or even more of the points in the last 10 or so days of the semester. That's not great. That just makes things chaotic and stressful. So to the extent that you can, spread out your assignments so you are not having that real flurry of chaos at the end of your semester. Your students will appreciate it. You'll appreciate it too. This next recommendation, I love this recommendation. I wish I had discovered this much earlier in my teaching career, but get the maximum from your students. What I mean by that is actually set maximums on your assignments. So if you think a paper is going to be 5 pages long, set the maximum for 3. I'm telling you, shorten your assessments. When you do this, this is going to be a win-win for you and your students. Because when I was a student and I had a paper that was a minimum of 5 pages, when I got to 5 pages, I was done. But my students tell me that when they get a maximum of 3, but really they need 5, what they have to do is they write the initial paper, but then they have to revise it. They have to go back and read it again. They have to make sure that everything there is an essential. So they're giving me not their first draft anymore. They're giving me a relatively polished, revised version that is more streamlined, more essential, and is only 60% of the length of the original assignment. That means I have fewer pages and words to read, and the words and pages are better. So this is win-win. It shortens your grading time. It shortens it reduces the time that you're going to have conflicting later because your students do better on the assignment. And if the goal is to help your students demonstrate their learning in a successful way, having them give you a later draft of that same work is probably a good way to do that. So I'm going to recommend on your assessments, give a little bit less than you think your students need. So presentations, a little bit less time, written stuff, a little bit fewer words. I'm a huge fan of having people do things in 1-word or 6-word essays or something like that. Keep them as streamlined as you can make it and still get that learning demonstrated. Then allow for personalization. When you use personalized assignments, these are more interesting for you. You're not reading the same paper 25 times, 50 times, 200 times. Every paper is going to be different. When every paper is different, it's going to be harder, not impossible, but it's going to be harder to cheat. And you can actually then kind of crowdsource examples for your class. So if you're having students give you, for instance, an example of a theory that you're talking about, you can then use the best ones next semester when you're teaching that theory. So this is a great way to kind of extend the interest of your class. And this deepens learning for your students because now we're moving up Bloom's taxonomy into those higher levels of application. So I'm a huge fan of personalized assignments. 7, we're going to infuse empathy into our classes. This is what I call empathetic course design. You're going to infuse empathy into everything. You're going to understand that being a student is hard. You're going to understand that your class is not the only thing in your students' lives. We want it to be an important thing. We want it to be a priority, but it's not going to be the only one. And I think we sometimes make the mistake that because we really like the class, that all of our students are going to devote all of their attention, all of their time, and they're going to have unlimited, kind of time and energy to spend on our class. That's not true. So empathize to that experience that our students have, and then infuse that empathy throughout your course. And I have a number of video links to help you do that if you're interested. We can have syllabus statements that are empathetic. If we use Zoom, there's empathetic ways to do that. You can empathize in your course structure and your policies, in your assignments and your assessments. And we can actually then get around what I think is a problem with the term academic rigor. When a lot of people use the term academic rigor, in my opinion, they use it to refer to arbitrary difficulty. Academic rigor is not arbitrary difficulty. Academic rigor is appropriate challenge with support. And that's what I want us to do in our classes. I want us to appropriately challenge our students and support their learning and their success. So we can now be striving to support and develop community in our classes by infusing empathy into it. My 8th recommendation is use student feedback as informative. So at the end of the semester, and maybe even before that, maybe you do a mid-semester evaluation, you get student feedback at the end of the semester on your T-Vals or whatever course kind of evaluation that you use, your students are going to have the opportunity to provide feedback. Sometimes that feedback will be something you maybe didn't want to hear. Don't overreact, right? Sometimes students are going to say things. Sometimes you're not going to want to hear it. Don't overreact to student feedback. For instance, I see a lot of times, especially people who are maybe a little bit newer to teaching, is one student will make a suggestion. No other student makes that suggestion in a relatively large course, and they revamp their course based on that single student suggestion because the student made the suggestion. If that feedback informed a course decision that you wanted to make and it fit with your teaching philosophy, great. But you are not obligated to make that change because a student suggests that you made it. Often what I will do is I'll go by patterns of feedback rather than idiosyncratic comments. We'll talk about that a little bit more this semester when we talk about T-Vals. But use that feedback as informative. Use it to help you think about what your course is set up to do. Use it to consider your practices in your course, but you're not obligated to use that feedback literally the way that they intended. 9th, this is getting to more of that sustaining. Let's assume you get a great class, but let's assume next semester you want to change a couple things. I'm going to recommend you tweak. I'm going to recommend you make small, subtle adjustments for your course from semester to semester. Unless there's really something motivating the change, I do not recommend that you overhaul your class semester to semester. The issue here, I often have students say, no, the class didn't go great, so I changed everything. That's not the way you would approach it as a researcher. That's not good programmatic research design. And a lot of people on this call are researchers, right? What we do in that case, overhauling a class, is we changed all the variables and then look to see if we get a different result. I much more like to change a variable, maybe a second variable, and look to see if I get the change that I'm looking for. So manipulate individual variables one at a time over the course of a number of semesters and years to perfect your courses over time. What this will do is it'll make it easier to kind of evaluate those adjustments and easier to sustain that teaching performance. And then my 10th recommendation, you're going to focus on maximizing your experience. I've kind of made allusion to this already. A lot of you, as I mentioned, made reference to the fact that it's hard to be motivated to achieve teaching excellence. It's hard to fit it in with the other responsibilities. Well, when you're focused on making it awesome for you, it's going to be easier to fit it in, easier to find the time, easier to be motivated. So I think the key, this is the key, in my opinion, to achieving sustaining teaching excellence is making the experience positive and fulfilling for you. When the teaching is done to create a positive experience for you, it's easier to do it well. It's easier to want to do it well. It's easier to put in the work that you need to put in to continue to do it well. So in conclusion, and I'll have another activity and I'll open up for comments here in a second, but in conclusion, to achieve and sustain teaching excellence, we're going to start by creating an excellent teaching philosophy. We're going to use that to inspire excellent teaching practices. We're going to use resources and the various suggestions that I've applied to you. And again, we've recorded this. So if you said, oh my goodness, he talked really fast, you can go through and watch the recording and plus pause if you need to. I'm also willing to share the slides with any of you, and there's lots of hyperlinks in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to enjoy this entire process because you know what? You got this. One of the things that I really appreciated is my teachers believing in me as a student. Well, I believe in all of you as teachers. And I'm super excited that you're part of this K-State teaching community and supporting the learning and success of all of our students. So what I want now is I'm interested in what your takeaway is. So I would love to know, what is one concrete takeaway from our conversation today that you will use to achieve and sustain your teaching excellence? I'd love you to drop that into a chat, and I'll read them out as they come in. You don't have to wait for the waterfall, but I'm really excited to see what you have. So please share those takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions here and in comments and all of your reactions here in just a second. All right, we got to remember that each student is a whole person. We've got peace. We've got to tell them I believe in them. Excellent. And you don't know how many students don't hear that and need to. So I love that. We've got enjoy the teaching process. We've got make it interesting for them and for me. You got reinventing the wheel is not necessary. You can take what works in one class and adapt it for another. That's excellent. Whatever your teaching philosophy is, it should be physically apparent to how you teach. Set the number of points in a class to 1,000. I really like that. It's a real small tweak, but it really helped for my classes. We have resources and amazing people. We're not isolated. Small, not large tweaks semester to semester. That is awesome. Here, I'm just popping up my email just in case it. And Ash, if you could drop my email into the chat if anyone wants it. But if you want copies of this presentation, want to help being a teaching superhero like I tried to be in that picture, I'd be happy to kind of help you out with that. And I'm happy to share the PowerPoint with you. So what I want to do now is want to give you the opportunity to give any questions, any reactions that y'all have so that we can kind of help you get ready for an excellent semester. And let's see, I've got one in the chat privately to me. I'll read it out. What's the recommendation for allowing drops for an exam or project? For example, a class has 4 non-final exams in a semester. The instructor says the students can drop one, typically lowest grade, so it's not calculated. Is this recommended? Is this effective, motivating, discouraging, or unproductive? There's lots of different opinions on this kind of dropping an exam. I'm a huge fan of dropping lower stakes kinds of things. So often what I'll do in my classes is rather than have them drop, I'll have them submit a wild card. So for instance, if I have 15 weekly reflections, you maybe can use 2 wild cards. So rather than submitting a weekly reflection, you submit a Word doc that just says wild card and you get the points for that week for that. For larger assignments, I'm a little bit more ambivalent about kind of dropping a big one. In the case that this person is describing, they got 4 section exams. I've had colleagues do that and then have a substantial number of their students stop attending class after the 3rd exam. Because at that point, they have the grade that they want, they're happy with that, and they have now avoided a quarter of the course content. So I'm not a huge fan of dropping a big thing like that myself. I do know that there are people who are proponents to that. I do like the empathy that motivates that, but in practice, that hasn't worked for me. So what other questions or comments or recommendations that people have? And by the way, if you disagree with what I just said, perfect. You have every right to do that. I'll remind you, disclaimer at the beginning, you can, refuse any recommendation or comment that I make. Someone says, can I use pair and share activities to sustain excellence? And by the way, I call them think, pair, share. I think it's what a lot of people do. A lot of people forget the think part. When I do think, pair, shares, I think it's important to have your students have a little bit of time to independently come up with their idea before they pair and then before they share. When I do a think, pair, share, I also recommend that you make it very clear to your students what they're going to be sharing. So make it very clear what you want that product of that interaction to be, and then give your students the opportunity to share out. I love think, pair, shares and lots of other forms of active learning. You can click some links in the PowerPoint that I made for today with lots of learning suggestions, but think, pair, shares are awesome. And it's something your students are probably going to know how to do. I know that my daughter reported doing them in her first grade class as a student in first grade. My daughter is still a student. But they use them really, really early in K-12. I think using them in higher ed is great. That's awesome. Someone said, any experience on a case-based teaching approach? So if by case-based mean kind of use an example that's going to kind of drive the learning, I think those are awesome. And I think you can use really involved cases, or you can use relatively brief cases. One of my colleagues is named Jennifer Smith. She's a fantastic teacher, and she teaches a class in our department called psychopathology. So they talk about psychological disorders, their assessment, their treatment. And what will often happen is on Tuesday, she'll kind of talk about the overarching diagnosis of the disorder, the symptoms, the characteristics, those kind of things. And then on Thursday, they deal with an in-depth case study of someone presenting with that, how those symptoms actually manifest, how an intake might be done, and those kind of things. So it becomes a really kind of nice rhythm to the class where knowledge is kind of shared out on Tuesday and then applied to the case-based approach on Thursday. So I think that's a really, really cool way that I've seen that done. Excellent question. Thank you for that. And I don't know if Jennifer's here, but if anyone sees her, tell her I gave her a shout out because she's awesome. So any other questions? And I have questions for y'all. If you're not going to ask questions, I tell my students this all the time. Not having questions doesn't mean we get done early. And it doesn't mean like I can make you stay, right? You can go off when you want, but I have more questions that I could potentially ask. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to share before I ask a couple? All right. I want to know, and you can drop it in the chat if you want. You can say it out loud. I want to know something you did this week to let your students know your class was going to be awesome. So what's something you did this week? Let your students know your class was going to be awesome. And someone dropped out. They're like, not sharing that. I see some wheels turning. I know some of you are thinking of something.
Well, I'll take a hack at it. I'm teaching a new course, which is a case-based approach. And so what I told them is that, I would not be talking in the class. They're going to do all the talking. And when they're talking, they're not looking at me, they're looking at their friends, because they are going to have dialogue among themselves. And I'm going to steer the conversation one way or another, depending on how things are going to be. And it seems that, they liked it.
So Tarek, I'm not surprised at all that you have a wonderful thing that you're doing in your class. That sounds amazing. That's a great way to establish community. It's a way to empower your students. That is awesome. And I'm sure that's going to be a wonderful semester. Again, shout out, Tarek's going to be one of our presenters later this semester, and see what kind of awesome ideas he has. Dora says that she shares her personal story with humor and the reflection. I love that. Sharing your personal story kind of shows that authenticity part of peace to your students, especially if a little bit of humor in there, a little bit of self-deprecation, maybe just a teeny bit. Great way to relate to your students. Suzanne talks about recording weekly welcome and explaining how cool it is. Giving a video welcome before your students even come to class makes it a little bit less scary for your students to come in and to see you for the first time. So I really like that. And then Faraday talks about, I played a motivational music video at the end of class, which got them all excited. I love that. I went to a meeting last week. Tamara Bauer was kind of one of the people who set the meeting up, and Happy by Pharrell Williams was played on repeat when we first got there. And it just set a really cool tone. So I'm not sure what song you kind of had there, but I had something similar in my own meeting experience recently. Well, those are awesome. I do want to make a couple of reminders. We're going to try to get done about 12:50 this year instead of 1 o'clock, because I do know people often have 1 o'clock appointments, and I want to be respectful of that. I won't always be able to control the presenters, so I'll tell you now, we'll try to get done about 12:50. So a couple of announcements before we conclude. Number one, we're going to give you the opportunity to do a post-event survey to kind of give your feedback on this event and all the other events throughout the semester. If you're pursuing a professional development certificate, which again, Ashley will drop that probably into the chat, doing those post-event surveys will contribute to that. Next week, we have a wonderful presentation by Sydney Alexis and Teresa Merrick Cassidy on AI, pedagogy, and curriculum. We're really excited for that next week. And as always, I'm so excited that you made time for the TLC Professional Development Series today. I'm sure you're all having a great, wonderful week of classes. For those of you like me who are a little bit overwhelmed, do understand we're going to hit that rhythm maybe in the second and third week, but I'm rooting for you. And if anyone needs to reach out for any reason, I would love to hear from you. But thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.